Well, welcome to the 13th annual Port Townsend Film Festival. You're here with the film The Chinese Garden documentary. Valerie So. I just want to talk a little bit about your credentials here. You're an educator. Now, you're a professor where?
I teach at San Francisco State University.
Oh, great.
In Asian American Studies.
Cool. And writer and an artist. Experimental videos and installations, which I believe focus on gender, cultural identity, and anti-racism struggles. And you've exhibited at the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and in New York, both the Museum of Modern Art and New Museum in New York City. And you have a great blog, and the name of the blog is?
Beyond Asiaphilia.
And that's won a grant, most recently, the Andy Warhol Foundation.
Yeah.
So, congrats. So, The Chinese Garden. Tell us the journey. What brought you to make the film?
Oh, my goodness. Well, back some years ago, I was here in Port Townsend on a residency at Centrum, which is in Fort Worden. And I was walking around, and I came across the lagoon and the plaque that's next to it that said, "This is where the Chinese gardens used to be, and the Chinese used to grow vegetables here to sell in Port Townsend." And so I looked at the plaque, and then I looked around, and there was no evidence of gardens or vegetables or Chinese people. And so I just thought to myself, wow, that's really interesting. So I wanted to figure out what happened to these Chinese people and these vegetables. So then I went down to the Historical Society, the Jefferson County Historical Society, and I did a bunch of research, and they got a lot of stuff in their archives.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Who did you work with there?
Yeah, I can't remember because that was a while ago, but recently Bill Tennant is the person that I dealt with, and also his assistant, who's the archivist, whose name I can't remember.
Now, you've worked on a lot of experimental videos as an artist. What led you to a documentary that's a little more structured?
You know, this is sort of an experimental documentary in that it's not just talking heads and, cutaways and so forth. It's got a lot of text, right? There's no voiceover. It has split screen stuff. So I kind of was trying to do a hybrid of both an experimental film and a documentary. And since the subject matter is pretty rich, I wanted to make a longer piece. A lot of the stuff I've done has been pretty short. So this is fairly long for me. I mean, some people would say 17 minutes is not very long, but when you're used to doing stuff that's like 4 minutes long.
Well, talk about the subject of the film a bit more. Yeah.
Well, like I said, I found out that there were Chinese in Port Townsend for maybe about 20 or 30 years, starting around the 1880s. And at one point, there were about a quarter of the population of the town. So let's say the town was 1,000 people, and there was about more or less 500 Chinese here. So that's a good percentage. And there was a big Chinatown downtown on Water Street. And they were, pretty well incorporated into the town. They were fairly accepted, I think that a lot of the Chinese businessmen worked with some of the white business people. So they weren't, like, ostracized, although they certainly had to live in a certain part of town. But so I'm always interested in finding out like little stories like that about Asian Americans and Chinese Americans, because after 1910, I think there was no more Chinatown. So between 1880-ish and 1910, there was Chinese people, and then they all went away.
Now, what was the central business then?
I think Zhai Trading Company was the central business, which you can see in a lot of the archival pictures of downtown Port Townsend, because it had it written on the side of the wall. So it was like a mercantile, and an import-export place. It was also the place where Port Townsend was also a port of entry for Chinese coming into the country from Canada mostly. So they'd go to Victoria and then sail over here, both illegally and legally. So Zhai Company was where they put the Chinese women, because the women couldn't be housed with the men, right? And the men were in the customs house, which I think is the post office now.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was kind of like the immigration station. Yeah.
And more specifically, the content of the film deals with, does it deal with certain families that you followed? Or?
There was one woman who I contacted. I can't even remember the process. Someone had just mentioned her name, whose great-grandfather was one of the merchants here. And her name was Gloria Lam Wakayama. So her family's last name is Lama. And she is a lawyer who has a business here in Port Townsend, as well as in Seattle. So she's one of the people who is still associated with the town, and her great-grandfather also used to live here and have a business. And I think her family lived here for a long time before they relocated to Seattle. So that was one of the main people. And then I was also looking for a family named Gao. Robert Gao was a Chinese resident here. I think he passed maybe just not too long ago. But none of the rest of his family lives here anymore. But they were one of the original families here, too. And there's pictures of him as a little kid in the movie. And his parents, too, probably. Yeah.
So what basically happened?
Well, there was a recession after the Civil War. When did the Civil War end? In the mid-'70s, right? So the Chinese were scapegoated for this economic recession. In Port Townsend, it wasn't quite so bad, but up and down the West Coast, there was a lot of anti-Chinese violence. Within Port Townsend, the economy got really, really bad as well. And so one night in the early 1900s, there was a big fire downtown. And downtown caught fire, and apparently, this is a legend that maybe or may not be substantiated. The firemen did not put out the fire in the Chinese buildings. They only saved the white establishments. So the Chinese pretty much thought that was a message, I think. Chinatown burned to the ground, and probably within about 10 or 15 years, most of the Chinese people had left, after the fisheries closed, too.
Now, and you, with the film, then, your point being that this sort of embodied what was going on.
I think so, on a less extreme level. I mean, around Tacoma and Seattle and California and so forth, there was like murders and lynchings. See, in Port Townsend, less extreme, but still there's a general sentiment of anti-immigrant beliefs. So, and like I said, scapegoating for the recession, kind of like now, right?
And how did they feel? Yeah, how did they feel that the Asian community was responsible for?
Oh my goodness. The same thing that they say about Latino immigrants. They're coming here and working for lower wages. They don't want to settle here. They just want to send all their money back to their home country. They can't integrate with society here because their culture is too foreign. They're heathens, of course, right? Because people were very religious back then. They have diseases. So all this stuff that you kind of can, if you listen to Rush Limbaugh, he kind of says the same kind of stuff, except replacing that with Latino immigrants. So it's
wow.
It's an interesting parallel, yeah.
Is that one of the reasons you wanted to?
Oh, yeah. I wanted people to know that this is the same kind of stuff that had been repeated, a little more than 100 years ago. And to be conscious that that's a method of placing the blame on people who aren't really to blame.
Right.
So, yeah.
Now, with your experimental work, I don't know if you had worked solo or if you had a cinematographer in your other works, but was this the first time you worked with a cinematographer? Like a crew? Because I know you did a lot of handheld.
This is not the first time I've worked with a crew, but this is, I did another longer documentary just prior to this that I had a small crew. I mean, crew meaning a camera person, a sound person, and someone to carry stuff. So it wasn't like a big old group of people. So it's nice. I have to say, technology is really complicated now. So when I started making stuff back in the day, I could shoot my own stuff, right, and edit my own stuff.
What did you shoot on?
Oh my God, I don't even remember.
Yeah.
Probably some kind of, maybe if I had a lot of access to something, it would be like SVHS. And then gradually maybe I moved up to like mini DV. So, but then it's interesting because now the person who shot this last film, he shot it on his Canon 5D, which is the DSLR, right? But the picture quality is incredible because the technology has gone so far that you can get cinema quality stuff on your DSLR. So it's not like you have to hire a big giant rig, although he certainly has that too. But so if you look at the movie, it looks incredibly beautiful, and he's using a consumer still camera to shoot video.
Now, how do you think people respond to that? They're expecting to see a lot of gear, and then there's this small. Now, are they more likely to open up, or?
Oh yeah, I think it's easier because they don't feel so threatened.
Yeah.
When you got, my camera person, John Kiffmeyer, brought a little bit of lighting. A lot of times we shot outdoors, or we just were, available light. And you always have to have a good sound guy, so you definitely have someone walking around with a microphone, carrying the microphone, but the camera is very unintimidating. So it's good.
Yeah. And
it's more portable. You can get a lot of more stuff. We did a lot of shooting in the Shanghai restaurant here that's down on the wharf near, what is it, down by the other part at the end of town, near the Maritime Center, and in the kitchen. And, if we had like a giant camera, we wouldn't have been able to get in that kitchen and shoot all this stuff, because the kitchen's really crowded. So that was really great. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people feel more comfortable with that. They forget the camera's there.
Now, how big was the crew on this film?
It was me and the 3 people, the sound guy, the camera guy, and the person who carries things, who is a local person, Sam Force.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, he's a great guy, yeah.
Now, what was your, how much film did you have to shoot to get to 17 minutes?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
How many hours was it? I don't even remember how many hours it was. One thing about shooting on digital is you can shoot a lot. But we came up twice to Port Townsend / Seattle for maybe like 3 or 4 day weekends. And then did an interview in San Francisco. So, it was not hundreds of hours, but it wasn't just like a few. So it was a lot of stuff to look at. Yeah.
Comparing the experience of doing totally experimental and something a little more structured, do you prefer one over the other?
Well, it's nice to be able to do everything by yourself.
Yeah.
And it's more spontaneous, right? But again, like I said, now that technology is so complicated, if I want to get a certain look in post-production, I might not necessarily know how to do it anymore, so it looks even sort of remotely professional. So the titles were all done by another person who just specializes in doing graphics and After Effects. Because I could have taught myself, but it would have taken so long. That it was much more worth it to hire a person who knows how to do it. And so that's kind of nice, too. And then he also has creative input because he's like a filmmaker himself. So
Sure.
It's kind of collaborative, yeah.
What was the reaction to the film so far, you feel, overall?
It was really fun showing it here in Port Townsend because people recognize all the landmarks. So a few people have come up to me afterwards, like last night at the salmon dinner thing. Some woman just came and started talking to me. She said, "Oh, I understand why that lot is empty because, I saw your movie." So that's really fun. I really like doing that. So, yeah. And then other people are they're surprised, I think. Especially in Port Townsend, too. It's like, wow, they say I live like across the street from the Chinese Gardens and I never knew why it was called that. Several people have said that to me. So.
And how's that feel?
It's fun. I'm glad that kind of like excavates this little layer of history that people don't know about, even in Port Townsend. I'm definitely like outside of Port Townsend. There's not a lot of people who know about this stuff. Even though it was a pretty big deal back in the 1880s when all these Chinese were being run out of the West Coast. There's books on the subject, but it's still not as well known as something like, even like the Japanese internment is pretty well known now, right? It's certainly not as well known as like the Holocaust.
Right.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot of folklore here about the ghost, and you spotlight a ghost story in your doc.
In my research, I found that the Z-Tai Trading Company, which was, like I said, that main mercantile place, did have the Chinese women staying in the upstairs rooms while they were being processed, their immigration papers. And apparently, I'm not sure what happened to this woman, if she killed herself or what. But for a long time, her ghost supposedly haunted that building. And so one of the quotes in the movie is that, we never went into this room upstairs because there was a ghost in there who cried all the time. And I think you can even go on like the internet and look this up, like Ghost Port Townsend, and that'll come up. So I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but it's interesting that it's become part of the local story here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How have you been doing here in Port Townsend as a filmmaker? Are you going to come back?
Oh, the film festival is the best film festival. It's so fun. Everybody is really nice, and you guys have like incredible food, and it's all within walking distance. But it's really nice. The films that are on the program are really, really incredible too. I saw Woman of Tokyo last night, which is a silent Ozu film with live accompaniment. Oh, that was great. So it's been really a really great experience.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Where can we find the DVD?
You can go to the website, which is www.thechinesegardens.com.
And next screening?
The next screening, I think it's showing next Friday at the Video Fest in Dallas, and then it's going to show in November at the San Diego Asian Film Festival, and I might be able to come back up to Seattle in the spring.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Valerie,
Thank
and enjoy the rest of your time here. Thank you.
Thanks. Cool.